Jake couldn't believe it. Arrested in front of his classmates, accused of something he didn't do. Just when it seemed all hope was lost, his childhood friend burst into the courtroom with a phone that changed everything. The truth came out, but what followed? It'll leave you speechless. But let's start from the beginning. It was a bright, ordinary Tuesday morning when Jake Patterson's life was shattered. He had just finished his final exam at Eastbrook High, the last one before summer break, and he couldn't wait to get home. The exam was a blur, but he was free now, and all he wanted was to kick back and relax. He smiled to himself as he walked out of the classroom, eager to see his friends, maybe grab a bite to eat. But as he reached the hallway, 2 police officers stood in his path, their presence as out of place as it was unsettling. "Jake Patterson, you are under arrest for the assault of Mary Davis," one of the officers announced in a matter-of-fact tone. Before Jake could even process the words, a cold metal click echoed in the quiet hall as the handcuffs were fastened around his wrists. His stomach dropped, and his mind raced. Assault? Mary Davis? What was going on? His mouth went dry, and he opened it to speak, to say something, to explain that this was all a mistake. But the officers didn't give him a chance. "We're taking you in," the other officer muttered, his voice stern. Jake's heart pounded in his chest as the reality of the situation crashed over him. Mary Davis, his classmate, someone he barely knew, had accused him of attacking her. It didn't make sense. Why would she accuse him? What had happened 2 days ago that he wasn't even aware of? In the hallway, the whispers started almost immediately. He could feel the stares of his classmates, the disbelief in their eyes, the judgment before anyone even knew what was really going on. Some people looked away, unwilling to meet his gaze. Others stood frozen, mouths agape, as the officers led him out in handcuffs. Jake tried to focus, tried to make sense of the madness, but his thoughts were jumbled, like pieces of a puzzle that didn't fit. He didn't remember anything out of the ordinary happening 2 days ago. He didn't remember ever getting into any kind of confrontation with Mary. Yet here he was, a 16-year-old kid, dragged through the hallways like a criminal. Mary Davis was a popular girl, friendly, outgoing. She was liked by everyone, the teachers, the students, even the principal. No one ever said a bad word about her, and that was the problem. No one even considered the possibility that she might be lying. The accusation alone was enough to devastate Jake's reputation. How could anyone doubt it? A girl like Mary wouldn't make something like this up. At least, that's what everyone assumed. It didn't matter that Jake had never been in trouble before, that he was a quiet kid who stayed out of drama. The damage was done the moment the words left her mouth. The whispers followed him all the way to the police car, each one like a dagger in his chest. He sat in the back of the police car, his mind spinning, his hands still numb from the cuffs. He wanted to scream, to demand answers, to beg someone to listen. But there was nothing. Nothing except the sound of the engine humming, and the heavy weight of a future he hadn't even begun to imagine. The rest of the day passed in a blur of interrogation rooms, cold stares, and questions that felt like a punch to the gut. Jake could barely process any of it. All he knew was this. His life, as he knew it, was over. The world he had grown up in, his school, his friends, everything, had just turned against him. And all because of an accusation that made no sense. All he could think about was how quickly everything had fallen apart. How everything he had worked for, all the plans he had made for his future, seemed to vanish in an instant. But no matter how hard he tried to understand, the one question remained. Why Mary? Why him? What had really happened that day? The courtroom was thick with tension, the air almost suffocating. Jake sat at the defendant's table, his hands trembling in his lap, eyes fixed on the polished wood of the table. He could barely hear the murmurs of the spectators around him. His mind was too preoccupied, too consumed by the weight of the situation. Beside him, his parents sat stiffly, their faces pale, their eyes hollow with worry. His mother's hand rested on his arm, but it offered little comfort. They were all trapped in a nightmare that had no end in sight. Across the room, Mary sat calmly with her lawyer, her posture immaculate, her face an unreadable mask. She had the air of someone who knew she was in control. Every inch of her demeanor exuded confidence, as if the outcome of the trial was already decided. But Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It was as though a dark cloud hung over him, mocking him with its uncertainty. Mr. Collins, Jake's lawyer, stood in front of the judge, his voice steady and convincing. He painted Jake as a good student, a quiet kid with no history of violence. But the evidence was a wall he couldn't scale. Testimonies from several students who had seen Jake near the area on the day of the alleged assault. CCTV footage showing him walking away from the scene. The facts were against him, and the courtroom seemed to close in, suffocating him with every word. Jake's heart sank as the testimonies mounted, each one adding weight to the chain around his neck. His parents exchanged worried glances, their hope dwindling with each passing minute. But then, his mother leaned closer, her voice a soft whisper in his ear. "I know my son, Jake. He would never hurt anyone." Her words, though gentle, cut through the chaos. They were the only thing that grounded him in the storm of accusations and doubts. He wanted to believe her. He needed to believe her. He wiped away a tear that threatened to fall, trying to hold himself together in front of the judge and the packed courtroom. The reality of the situation was overwhelming, suffocating him. His life, everything he had worked for, was disintegrating piece by piece. Yet, in the back of his mind, a quiet voice kept asking, what if it was all a mistake? The trial pressed on, each moment feeling like an eternity. Then, unexpectedly, a crack appeared in Mary's seemingly perfect story. The name Lucas was called, and a classmate from school stepped into the witness stand. His eyes darted nervously as he addressed the court, but his words were clear. He had been near the scene of the alleged incident, and what he saw didn't match Mary's account. According to Lucas, he had seen Mary in a heated argument with another boy, not Jake, just moments before the assault supposedly took place. The boy in question was someone none of them had heard of before. Jake's heart skipped a beat. For the first time in days, a small glimmer of hope flickered in the darkness. Could this be the breakthrough they needed? The courtroom fell into a heavy silence. The truth, or at least part of it, was starting to come to light. But there was a catch. Mary's story was so precise, so detailed, that the inconsistencies seemed too small to be significant. The prosecutor didn't flinch, and Mary remained as composed as ever, refusing to react to the new revelation. It was as if the cracks in her story didn't matter to her, or perhaps she was so sure of her own version of events that nothing could shake her resolve. Jake's parents exchanged another look, this time with a hint of cautious optimism. They weren't ready to jump to conclusions. Not yet. The damage had already been done, and the trial was far from over. But for Jake, the testimony of Lucas felt like a lifeline, a spark of hope in the suffocating darkness. As the trial continued, Jake clung to that small piece of evidence. It wasn't enough to guarantee his freedom, but it was a crack in the wall, and cracks, no matter how small, were all he needed to begin breaking through.